Right, so I think we'll get started. I think just as an introduction, my name is Sarah. I'm one of the regional coordinators for the program for Sacramento and Sierra Nevada region for CivicSpark, a national program service for local government commission. And I think we're really excited, and this is our second session of CivicSpark's class of 2019-2020 graduation poster symposium session, where we're really celebrating the successes and accomplishments of fellows while they're serving with local governments throughout California. And today's session is entitled Big Picture Adaptation, and I think we're really excited to get started. I think just a few logistics before we start. If you experience any technical difficulties, I think during the call, feel free to message Kaylee McCain, who is our co-facilitator today, and she will be she can help you out with any, I think, technical difficulties. You can send her a private message through the chat function, and she can help you with that. And I think with this, we'll have, I think, fellows presenting about 5 to 6 minutes for their presentations, where they're presenting on their capstone posters and any supplementary slides. The posters will really be summarizing their kind of key accomplishments over the course of these 11 months and their service towards local governments across California. After each presentation, we will have time, I think, for any questions that you may have, for which you can either, I think, unmute yourself and ask the question directly, or if you'd like, you can, I think, just use the chat function to ask your questions there. And I will be reading those out, I think, to the fellows. And I think with this, we will also be sharing a new interactive tool for you all to kind of visually see where the fellows are. We'll be having this tool that has a map, I think, of where the fellows projects are and has links to their capstone posters. So I think if after the program you're interested in reading more about a fellows projects or want to, I think, see where they're located geographically or want to just read over their poster afterwards, you'll be able to do that. And we'll be sending that interactive tool in the next week or two once we do have that available. And with that, I think finally, I would like to really encourage you all to, I think, have participation, I think, in the chat with this virtual event, to share any of your encouragement or any of your congratulations in the chat box as the fellows are presenting. And I think with that, without further ado, I think we'll be getting to our main presentations. So we'll be starting out with Miles Gordon, who's serving with the California Office of Emergency Services, followed by Julia Cohen, who is serving with Yolo Resiliency Collaborative, and then Carissa Bradley, who is serving with Sierra Business Council. And I'll let Miles take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here today. As Sarah said, my name is Miles Gordon, and I'm serving with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. So my main project this year was to help update and pilot the California Adaptation Planning Guide. The California Adaptation Planning Guide is a state-produced resource for climate adaptation planning by local governments and regional planning agencies. It provides a step-by-step process for climate adaptation planning that includes, if I can direct your attention to the graphic on the right, exploring, defining, and initiating your process, assessing your community-level vulnerability, defining your adaptation framework and strategies, and implementing, monitoring, and adjusting your approach. It provides technical and process guidance for each of these phases, as well as example strategies in a diversity of sectors, and most importantly, considerations for incorporating meaningful community engagement and equity and environmental justice concerns throughout your process. Now, our concept for my project for this year was designed to make this document as accessible and as usable as possible to our end users, local governments. To do this, my primary role in the APG update process was to do 3 main things. Engage 2 local communities to pilot the APG update by providing technical assistance on their climate change planning processes, gather comments on the APG draft as it was being used and implemented, and then compile successes on lessons learned on these projects into case studies that other jurisdictions could learn from, and in this way tie our state-level guidance into local-level efforts while also using the local efforts to feed our draft guidance. Now, the 2 communities we engaged in this process were Butte and Tulare counties. These are both the rural under-resourced communities that could stand to benefit the most from this targeted technical assistance. Butte County in particular was motivated to plan for climate change as long-term recovery from the Camp Fire of 2018, and so proved to be an excellent project to pilot the draft APG. Butte County sought to update their health and safety element to incorporate climate change and wildfire risk to be compliant with SB 379, the bill that requires climate change vulnerability to be incorporated into your health and safety element upon your next update. This work has subsequently been folded into a full update to their general plan. And as part of this process, we developed a menu of adaptation strategies for the county based on existing cases from other jurisdictions, as well as the draft APG, and additionally, a resource packet for stakeholders that educated them on climate change causes, effects, and strategies. We used the APG as part of these two efforts to educate Butte County stakeholders by providing them with example strategies and process guidance, and additionally used it to organize a framework document for Butte County climate change adaptation that will contain key priorities from community-based stakeholders to guide the plan update. And now, as a plug for more information on these projects, please go see Lauren Sugai's presentation on the work that she has done with Butte County, as I worked very closely with her on these items on the 21st. Now, in Tulare County, our other community, our primary project was to develop and implement a community-level climate change plan for Matheny Tract, an unincorporated census tract in Tulare County that is host to a highly disadvantaged agricultural community. We did this in partnership with the Tulare County Resource Management Agency, the Tulare County Health and Human Services Administration, and Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, a locally based CBO. We implemented a year-long process to identify community needs and priorities, map important community assets, identify community vulnerabilities, and to derive appropriate adaptation strategies. In this process, we utilized the draft APG to guide the overall process, develop our community engagement strategy, identify community vulnerabilities, and develop and organize appropriate strategies utilizing the example strategies in the APG, as well as ones that we received and derived from our community engagement and input process. Now another plug, I've worked closely with Arlen Benavides, the CivicSpark Fellows based in Tulare County on this project as well. If you want to hear more about that and his work with the county, please go see his presentation on the 17th. Now, why we did all this was two things. To begin with, we received direct feedback from both of these communities on the draft APG as it was being utilized. This resulted in a more usable product overall because we were able to tailor it as it was being written to their specific experiences. Second, we compiled these lessons learned from these experiences into project case studies that other jurisdictions can learn from as they seek to implement the APG in their own jurisdictions going forward. This project has hence served as a model for how state policy guidance can be responsive to local needs and concerns, but also how state agencies can provide targeted technical assistance to actually help local governments implement state-level best practices in a way that is responsive to their needs and priorities. And that this project can therefore serve as a model for how this might occur in a way that is mutually beneficial. And I'm extremely proud of what we have been able to accomplish as a first step. You can find the draft APG when it is released, as well as the respective project case studies when they are finalized, is at caloes.ca.gov/climate. And with that, I will take any questions you might have about the project.
Thanks, Miles. So if anyone has any questions, you can, I think, put it in the chat box, or you can, I think, unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Miles.
Hey, Miles, this is Kif. Thank you so much for this. I got a quick question, I hope quick question. I'm curious, maybe two parts. What was the piece of the APG that you found, sort of worked best, or maybe also which didn't work well when you actually were trying to work with communities on it? Were there clearly places where it had been written without community input, so when you put it to work on the street, did you find that some things are going to need to change to make it effective?
Absolutely. So I think the part that was definitely most accessible to communities was the example strategies that are provided in the document, and there's a whole appendix, but for example strategies in a variety of sectors and actors. And I think part of what that highlighted is that a lot of communities want to take action, but don't really have context and text for what has worked. And so I found that to be a very accessible component to the APG to highlight to community stakeholders. incidentally, as I mentioned before, like the APG highlights considerations for incorporating meaningful engagement and community and equity, environmental justice concerns, and so on and so forth throughout the process. And we got some comment on that. That essentially said, this all looks great, but we don't have the budget. And so I think that one thing to look at going forward, in terms of implementing the APG, is how to make community engagement work for folks that, regardless of their intentions, just don't have the capacity. And I think that's part of where CivicSpark comes in quite well.
Great. Any other questions? If not, I think we'll move on to our next fellows, but I think we will have some time at the end if you have any questions that do come up, or you can reach out to Miles directly through his email as shown on the slide here. So up next, we have Julia Cohen with Yolo Resiliency Collaborative.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate the big turnout we're seeing. So I am a climate fellow with the Yolo Resiliency Collaborative, and the YRC is a staff-based organization that formed in 2018 to help facilitate climate resilience planning in Yolo County. The YRC has amassed quite a few members at this point, but the 6 main beneficiaries I worked closely with this year are the City of Davis, the City of West Sacramento, the City of Winters, the City of Woodland, Yolo County, and Yolo County Housing. So a quick little history: the YRC hired their first fellow in 2018 who laid the foundation for the collaborative's work by creating the Resilience Planners Toolkit. This document enables jurisdictions to adapt to climate issues in a collaborative, cohesive way by providing sample planning language that can be incorporated into jurisdictional plans. And another huge benefit of the toolkit is that it helps jurisdictions comply with SB 379. The YRC's focus on cross-jurisdictional collaboration is really important to note because we can only adapt to climate change if we work together. My role this year with the Yolo Resiliency Collaborative has been firstly to pursue outreach and communication around the toolkit to help inform stakeholders of its existence and how it can be of use to them in their work either as regional or local planners. Additionally, I've expanded the toolkit to address other resiliency topics expected to affect Yolo County and, of course, much of California as well, as the document started as heat resiliency with its as its main focus. So some of the main milestones accomplished during my service year included the new resiliency sections we added to the toolkit, and those include agriculture, noting Yolo County's strong agriculture sector, wildfire, and the wild and urban interface. 24 new climate resiliency draft policies were added in line with those 3 new sections. And as part of my outreach presentations, 4 were given to various stakeholder meetings and events throughout the county. About 10 regional and county planners were engaged in this process, and about 95 community residents reached by these outreach events. So moving forward, next steps for the collaborative include plans to continuing deepening and broadening the toolkit, continuing outreach, and making sure that people know of its existence, know how it can be of use to them, and are trained to put it into use in their own communities. And we would like to make this available for use in the rest of California, throughout the United States, and maybe someday globally. So thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to our presentations today. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Julia. So I think if anyone has any questions, you can either chat them or unmute yourself. I think a question did come in from Kif, who is curious about if there's any linkages or connections between the YRC toolkit and the APG.
That's a great question, Kev. Thank you. The APG was a huge resource for me in helping to continue deepening the toolkit. It provided a lot of really good resources. I'm very grateful to Miles and his team for what they've done, because it's going to make adaptation planning a lot easier for a lot of California. So yes, a lot of the toolkit was very much inspired by the APG. I saw a question in the chat. It's the adaptation planning guide for the state of California. And yes, I can get a copy or a link out to you. If you want to email me, I can send it your way.
I think we have another question from, or a different question from Michael McCormick. I guess, did being a part of CivicSpark help with connecting dots across the draft APG and the YRC toolkit?
Yes, having access to Miles, who is wonderful, and the work that he's doing was incredibly beneficial for me. And if I wasn't part of this program, I don't think I would have been as aware of what was going on with the APG. So I'm very grateful to CivicSpark for helping forge those connections.
Any other questions? I think if not, we'll move on to our next fellow with Carissa Bradley, who is serving with Sierra Business Council.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carissa Bradley. I'm a CivicSpark Climate Fellow with Sierra Business Council in the Sac Sierra region, and Sierra Business Council is located in Truckee. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. So my projects, I had two distinct projects this year, one working with the city of Portola in Northern California and one being with Nevada County. I wanted to first give a little bit of background on Sierra Business Council as a whole, given that it is a little bit distinct, unique in the CivicSpark world, where it's a nonprofit versus working directly within the jurisdiction. So Sierra Business Council is a nonprofit located in Truckee, California. We have program areas that span from business development with our Sierra Small Business Development Center. We touch on rural broadband issues, government relations, and I specifically worked within our Sierra Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Partnership and the Climate and Energy Planning departments of our organization. We're a triple bottom line organization that focuses on the social, environmental, and economic prosperity of the Sierra Nevada region. As you can see on the map on the right here, our program area just specifically for Sierra Camp touches about 22 different counties. So there is a pretty wide variety of jurisdictions within that boundary. So it's a busy work, I will say. So next slide. I first wanted to talk about the similarities between the two projects, both being on the rural end of the spectrums. The city of Portola, for example, is a community of about 2,000 residents in the northern part of the Sierra Nevada boundary in Plumas County. It's a heavily forested area with little to no evacuation routes, so it was pretty easy to come up with a project right away that would be focused on wildfire preparedness, given some of the recent wildfires in the Sierra Nevada and across the state of California. My second project was with Nevada County to implement the Energy Action Plan, which Sierra Business Council had helped to research and publish the year prior to my service year. Next slide. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the city of Portola's project. When I first met with my beneficiaries and we were developing a workload and what we were hoping to build capacity in, wildfire came up again and again as a capacity issue. and that the city didn't necessarily have time to work on it at this point. And so I was able to come in and we were doing community education around the topic. Now there's tons of resources all across the state and throughout the web with educational tools on wildfire preparedness and evacuations, but they didn't seem specific enough to the community that we wanted to work in, which is the city of Portola. So with the help of the advisory committee that we were able to put together, we developed these 3 guidebooks. As you can see, the Ready, Set, and Go, a guide to defensible space and home hardening with different resources for community members on where to bring their green waste, some programs that are specific to the area, whether that be the senior green waste program that the county has put together. And then there's a guide on creating your evacuation plan and emergency supply kits. And then the final one is a wildfire evacuation guide that includes information on if you were to become entrapped in your home or where the evacuation routes would be. All of this is used to better educate the community on their options and ways to stay safe during the wildfire season, which, as we know, because of climate change, is extending to the full year. And mountainous communities like the city of Portola need to be prepared. So the next portion of this project will include more on the ground level community outreach with the printed guides and bringing them to each individual home in the region. And the volunteer fire department is a really great asset to this project as well, and will be extremely beneficial for the outreach portion of this project. We're really happy with where we've come so far. And then next. And so shifting gears a little bit to more of a climate mitigation project, which is the Nevada County Energy Action Plan implementation. The EAP was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in February of 2019. And the way that our energy action plans are written at Sierra Business Council, there are 2 implementation sides. There's the community working group implementation actions, and then there's the county actions. So the fellows job, which was my job, is to really kickstart the implementation, get the community working group established, host a monthly meeting, bring together stakeholders that are going to be assets when it comes to residential home energy efficiency outreach, or doing a webinar series, those sorts of things. So one of the biggest successes that we've seen in this project so far is that we have a consistent group of about 15 community members that meet monthly, completely volunteer based, and they have been a great asset to not only figure out the goals and the next steps of the project, but also being an advocate to the county when it comes to advocating on energy efficiency items. Now, on the county side of things, we have been so grateful that the Nevada County Board of Supervisors set their 2020 policy objectives to include the implementation of the Energy Action Plan, which elevated the project in and of itself. And we've had really engaged stakeholders at the county level to work to develop a web page on the county's website and become Beacon program participants, as well as just being great sports at figuring out the energy efficiency world with us. As we know, it can be very difficult at the local level to do these sorts of implementations, and Nevada County, as well as the city of Portola, have both been great partners to us. And if you have any questions, please let me know. That's my email. I can drop my personal email in there later if you need to. Thank you.
Great, and I think we have several questions in the chat that came in for you, Carissa. I think the first one's from Carolyn Yaveles, who is a previous alumni, who asked, was this work motivated or meant to comply with AB 747/SB 99 evacuation planning legislation?
That's a good question. With the city of Portola, I'm assuming is what that is geared towards. It wasn't actually brought about due to any state legislation, more of that the city recognized the need and maybe some outdated planning documents that existed and and they really were the ones that wanted to get this project started and to really think about how they would evacuate. If you've been to the city of Portola, there's essentially one way in and out of the city, and so there was a big motivation after seeing some of the devastation that had happened earlier on with the city of Paradise, which is similarly situated as Portola, but not necessarily. Yeah.
Great. And then there's an additional question from Allison Myers, who asked, how did you go about recruiting members for the Nevada County Energy Action Plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for recruitment of community members, Nevada County is really a unique space to work in. There's a lot of really engaged community members already working in the energy action sector, but the EAPs also call out specific stakeholders that should be recruited, whether that be from the Contractors Association or someone from the school board or things along those lines. So the EAP really does fall under that category, and we have some really great community members already. Most of them are actually retired energy sector workers, and so they bring a whole host of their own experience with data analysis and implementation of various state policies.
Great. And I guess if anyone has any other questions for Carissa, you can, I think, reach her through their email that she shared out at the end of her slide. And I think with that, we'll be moving on to our next 3 fellows who are placed at SCAG, which is Southern California Association of Governments, and that's Vanessa Reyes-Salazar, Natalie Arreaga, and Amanda Caswell, who will be presenting 3 together.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for being here. My name is Vanessa Reyes-Salazar, and as Sarah mentioned, I've been working at the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG for short, throughout the year, and I've had the pleasure of working with 2 awesome co-fellows, Natalie Arreaga and Amanda Caswell, whom you all will hear from later about some more of the work that we did at SCAG throughout this year. But one of the projects that we worked on was assessing climate adaptation planning progress across the SCAG region. And just for some background, the SCAG region encompasses 6 counties within Southern California, those being Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Imperial counties. And so we conducted a gap analysis of adaptation policies across the SCAG region. And for this gap analysis, we combed through websites of cities and counties and reviewed all available general plans, local hazard mitigation plans, and standalone plans, such as climate action plans, for all 191 cities and 6 counties that make up the SCAG region. And so the goal of this research and the gap analysis overall was to not only get a sense of progress towards compliance with Senate Bill 379 within the SCAG region, but to overall get a sense of progress, challenges, gaps, best practices within the SCAG region in regards to integrating adaptation policies within policy documents. And so the gap analysis is a component of another project SCAG has been working on this past year called the Climate Adaptation Framework, which is a resource that will support SCAG jurisdictions in their climate adaptation planning. And the framework will be available for public access in December of 2020. But we plugged in the data from the gap analysis into the Green Region Initiative, which is a SCAG GIS story maps-based tool that tracks and visualizes sustainability progress within the SCAG region across 12 sustainability topics and 29 indicators. And with the data, we updated specifically the adaptation planning indicator and the climate action planning indicators so that jurisdictions can not only see their progress in regards to climate adaptation planning and climate action planning, but they can see the progress their neighboring cities have made, share best practices, and share resources. And so it's a little hard to see the maps on the poster, but in the next slide, there's a better picture of what the adaptation planning indicator looks like. Next slide, please. And so the adaptation planning indicator, which can be found within the adaptation topic, ranks cities and counties based on their commitment to climate adaptation planning. So there's a 4-tier ranking, which ranges from white, no adaptation efforts, light green, acknowledges climate risks, medium green, drafted standalone plan, and dark green, adoption of standalone plan with extensive policies. And if you would like to learn more about a specific jurisdiction's ranking and the policy that informed that ranking, on the pop-up, you can click on the map itself, excuse me. You can click on a specific jurisdiction and you'll get a pop-up that gives you the city's name, the county they belong to, their ranking, and a hyperlink to the policy that informed that jurisdiction's ranking. And so the gap analysis data also was used to update the climate action planning indicator, which next slide, please, thank you, which can be found within the climate action topic. So for the purposes of the climate action planning indicator, which ranks jurisdictions based on the progress of their sustainability plans and climate action plans, the ranking is also a 4-tier ranking: no sustainability or climate action planning, light green, sustainability element or general plan policies, medium green, plan with GHG inventory and reduction measures, and dark green, detailed climate action plan. And so again, if you'd like to learn more about what a specific jurisdiction's ranking is, you can click on a jurisdiction. It'll give you this pop-up that'll give you all the information as well as a hyperlink to that specific policy. And as you can see for this indicator in the legend, there's 2 different categories, policy and performance. And that's because this specific indicator has both a policy and performance map. And on the actual website, you can use the gray bar that's here to the right to toggle between the 2 maps. And so this update to the GRI is just one part of the larger update that we did to the GRI during our time at SCAG. And my co-fellow Natalie Arreaga will talk more about the other updates we made, such as adding a brand new indicator. But in the meantime, this is all for me as far as this update. I'm happy to take any questions during Q&A. And happy to connect with anyone if any questions come up after the presentation. And yeah, thank you.
Great, and I think we'll move to Natalie, and then we'll save, I think, questions for all the SCAG fellows at the end of their presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Natalie Arreaga. As Vanessa mentioned, I'm one of the 3 fellows serving at SCAG. And one of the projects that we've been working on this year is a Green Region Initiative, which is a mapping tool that tracks sustainability progress across 12 topics and 29 indicators throughout the SCAG region. One of the updates that we made to the GRI this year is the addition of a new indicator called electric vehicle permitting streamlining to the motorized transportation topic. The motorized transportation topic now has 3 indicators, which also include electric vehicles and municipal fuel fleet. The purpose of adding this indicator is to track progress of compliance with Assembly Bill 1236 and evaluate the electric vehicle charging station permitting status of the 191 cities and 6 counties in the SCAG region. In order to gather data for this indicator, we partnered with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz. And for grading purposes, we reference their electric vehicle charging station permitting guidebook. Our research included looking through each jurisdiction's online municipal code in search of an ordinance and a checklist. If no ordinance was found online, we took the extra step of directly contacting city officials via email and/or phone in order to verify whether an ordinance exists. Assembly Bill 1236 was signed into law in 2015 and requires cities and counties to streamline permitting for residential and non-residential electric vehicle charging stations, as well as adopt an ordinance that creates an expedited streamlining process and a checklist of all requirements which electric vehicle charging stations comply with. For the electric vehicle permitting streamlining indicator, each ranking represents a jurisdiction's compliance of AB 1236. The 4 rankings are not streamlined, low streamlining, moderate streamlining, and fully streamlined. We based our grading on the scoreboard that is found inside the the EVCS guidebook, which has 7 criteria that cities and counties must meet. The first criteria is streamline an ordinance that creates an expedited, streamlined permitting process for electric vehicle charging stations. Number 2 is create a permitting checklist of all requirements needed for expedited review and should be posted on the city or county website. Number 3 is get administrative approval of electric vehicle charging station projects that meet expedited checklists from building official. Number 4 is the approval is limited to health and safety requirements found under local, state, and federal law. Number 5 is have electric signatures be accepted by authority having jurisdiction on applications. Number 6 is electric vehicle charging stations are not subject to association approval. Number 7 is complete one deficiency notice that shall be issued detailing all deficiencies in an incomplete application. And a bonus criteria is to create an expedited timeline for approval. Now going back to the grading in the GRI map, jurisdictions that met 0 criteria were ranked as not streamlined. Those that met 1 to 3 criteria were ranked as low streamlining. Those who met 4 to 6 were ranked as moderate streamlining. And those who met 6 to 7, including a checklist, were ranked as fully streamlined. On the map, once you click on a jurisdiction, ordinance are linked in the more info section of the pop-up window in the GRI map. Another update that we made as part of the GRI version 4.0 is the addition of a new topic, which Amanda will go into detail about.
Great, thank you, Natalie. And I think we'll move into our last SCAG fellow.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Nat, for that quick introduction. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Amanda Caswell. I'm at SCAG with Vanessa and Natalie. So they've given you a pretty good run through of the GRI tool, or Green Region Initiative. So I'll do a quick recap again. I'm sure you've got it down. It's a mapping tool tracking sustainability progress across the SCAG region. With our new update, version 4.0, it has 29 indicators and 12 topics. The newest of these topics is urban greening. So I'll talk a bit about that today and show you some examples of the maps. So urban greening consolidates information on parks, stormwater management, and urban forestry, covering policy information for all 3, again, on all 197 jurisdictions of the SCAG region. And it includes also performance metrics for parks with park availability and % tree canopy cover for urban forestry. Our goal with creating this topic and consolidating this information in one place for users was to highlight green space inequities across the region with the park availability and tree canopy cover, but also to highlight the multi-benefits from urban greening. It's a strategy for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. It promotes stormwater capture. It increases mental and physical well-being of neighborhoods and residents. It promotes active transportation, on and on. Big fan. It's great. So we wanted to highlight this for our users, planners, CBOs, developers, and a new addition that's also part of version 4.0, which you can see in this mini screenshot of the urban greening map, is a standalone Senate Bill 535 disadvantaged communities map, which allows users to see the locations of all the disadvantaged communities in the state, but specifically in the SCAG region. So it exists as a standalone map as well as in a consolidated map where users can see the SB 535 locations as well as all of the other indicator data and toggle on and off between these. And I'll show an example of that later. It's a little bit easier to visualize. So I'll cover some next steps and goals really quick before the example. One of our goals for next year, all 3 of us are continuing on with SCAG as senior fellows. So we would like to update our data on urban forestry specifically the performance metric tree canopy cover. Currently, we're using the iTree data set, which is excellent, but we would like to have our data analyzed from an aerial mapping source. Recently, Tree People did a project with LMU and Chapman, and they aerial mapped all of LA County with LiDAR data. So excellent, very high resolution, I believe up to 3 inches. So we would love to have that for the entire SCAG region. And SCAG is working on an aerial mapping project that should get underway soon. So it's very exciting. Some of the other goals we have for this tool is to continue to tailor it to be a tool, an asset for communities, CBOs, local jurisdictions when applying for grants. That was one of our hopes with including the SB 535 disadvantaged communities information, because so many grants want to allocate funds for these communities. So to allow or to create a tool that highlights those locations, as well as some other data sources that might be helpful when applying. Let's get into the examples. Sarah, next slide, please. So here is an example of just one of the indicators in urban greening, urban forestry. Specifically, I have the performance map showing, which is the tree canopy cover. So you can see users can zoom in and out and identify individual cities, or you can look at a county as a whole and see, based on the grading, again, white to just the medium green for this one. Unfortunately, nobody has dark green grading for canopy cover. And this is how all of the indicators work, as you saw previously with adaptation, climate action, and the electric vehicle permitting streamlining. So it's a similar grading from the white to dark green across the board. As you saw in Vanessa's, you can click on a city or a county to get the little pop-up to identify exactly what jurisdiction you're looking at. It again tells you the grading, and in most cases, there's a more info link to get to see what the grading is based off of. Next slide, please, Sarah. And here is an example of the consolidated map for urban greening. Again, this now exists for each of the 12 topics as part of version 4.0. So users can toggle on and off between the different indicator maps with the SB 535 map on and off as well. So here you can see the disadvantaged communities are in light blue, overlaid with the park policy map currently. And in this way, we hope users can see not only sustainability progress and, as mentioned, best practices, what are your neighboring communities working on, but highlight these communities who should maybe be identified for potential opportunity areas for progress and have a bit more funds allocated in order to combat that they are exposed to a higher percentage of pollution than the entire rest of the state. So we hope to promote environmental justice in the region with this tool and these updates. So those are my examples. I'll give a little plug for the SCAG Green Print, which is another project currently underway. It'll also be a mapping tool that highlights conservation, biodiversity, and habitat hotspots in the region in order for developers, planners to use just to consider these conservation efforts for land use planning. So stay tuned for that. It should be released in a year and a half to 2 years. But thank you all again for listening to our presentations, hearing about our work. Feel free to reach out to Vanessa and Natalie, myself at any point on our personal emails. There's also a GRI specific email that we will also monitor. So I can send it in the chat, but it's scaggreenregion@scag.ca.gov. And we're happy to field some questions right now. So thank you all.
Great, thank you. I think SCAG Fellows, and I think a few questions came in during your guys' presentations. Just gonna start from the top. I think the first one, Kith asked, I guess, where are some of the most significant gaps geographically or policy-wise that you found?
Yeah, so because the SCAG region, as you saw, is such a vast, covers so much land, so many cities and jurisdictions, they all work on very varying timelines. So while we have places like Los Angeles County that has 3 adopted adaptation plans that were considered dark green. So they have a local hazard mitigation plan with extensive adaptation policies. They have a general plan with extensive adaptation policies and a sustainability, I think it's a sustainability LA plan that has extensive adaptation policies. So we have those cases, and then we have also smaller cities in counties like Imperial or San Bernardino that have not yet addressed adaptation or climate risks in their policy documents. So everyone is working on different timelines, and that was one of the cool things about this project, was being able to get a sense of just the varying context and just how big and diverse the SCAG region is.
Great. And then I think another question from Kif. He was, I think, curious about local utilization of the GRI and wanted to know if local folks have been looking at it and if they've been using it to identify options.
That's a great question. That's actually something that we've been working on, is including a feature where we can see, like, we can track clicks and see from where those clicks come from. I'm not sure if we were able to incorporate that this round, but because, as Amanda mentioned, we'll be coming back a second year, which is more opportunity to work on the GRI and make it better and better, we'll be sure to incorporate that, because that's super helpful feedback for us to know who's accessing the GRI, who's getting the most use of it, where we can improve it to, so we can get even more use and be useful to everyone.
Great. And then a question came in from Annie Merritt, who asked, what is the funding source for the planned LiDAR mapping in the SCAG region?
So that project is still currently being developed. It hasn't officially gone underway yet, especially because SCAG, as it has 6 counties, is in negotiation with different counties that would like to be mapped versus some counties would prefer to not be mapped. So that's currently where SCAG is in the process. I believe the funding comes from SCAG's own funding, but to have a couple different funding sources, SB1, tax-based funding. So I'd have to check in on that, but I would love to talk about that with you offline.
Great. And then I think a question from Alexandra Huntinger. Is GIR tracking multi-jurisdiction policies, plans, or programs?
Yeah, for several jurisdictions, we actually cite plans from councils of governments and other sub-regional governments. So that's definitely, we look to them as well when we're doing our gap analysis research, and they're definitely a source that we look at when we look at just any policy. Yeah.
And I guess, are there any other questions, I guess, for SCAG Fellows? I know there's a lot of information presented.
Oh, also quick plug, we will be going into more depth about the GRI and our updates next Tuesday at a Toolbox Tuesday webinar that SCAG will be hosting. We can send out that information to you all after the presentation if any of you are interested. We'll be covering this and in a lot more depth, so hopefully you can all tune in.
Mm-hmm. Great. See if there's any questions that come in, if anyone wants to unmute themselves or chat those in. Not hearing or seeing any. I think we'll move on to our next fellow, which we have Annie Merritt from Delta Stewardship Council presenting next.
Yeah, so hi everyone, thanks for coming today. So as Sarah said, I'm Annie Merritt. I'm a CivicSpark Climate Fellow serving at the Delta Stewardship Council, which is a state agency. and my beneficiary is the City of West Sacramento. So the Delta Stewardship Council is currently undertaking a climate initiative called Delta Adapts, creating a climate resilient future. And this will consist of both a climate change vulnerability assessment and an adaptation plan for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So this service year, my CivicSpark project has focused on taking some results from the Delta-wide vulnerability assessment and providing the City of West Sacramento with some more specific information on the city's vulnerability to various climate hazards, including flooding and extreme heat. So today I wanted to talk about a very specific part of my project that I believe is highly replicable by other jurisdictions. And so that was my process to replicate a custom social vulnerability index that was developed by council staff as part of Delta Adapts. So to take a little step back, vulnerability is typically thought of as the interaction of exposure to a climate hazard, sensitivity to that hazard, and adaptive capacity, or the ability to recover from and adapt to those hazards. So the Council's Social Vulnerability Index was designed to identify populations in the Delta most highly sensitive to flooding, extreme heat, and wildfire smoke, and those populations that also have the lowest adaptive capacity to cope with those hazards. Next slide, please. So here you can see a map of the legal Delta and Sassoon Marsh. And so the Delta Stewardship Council has regulatory authority over the legal Delta and Sassoon Marsh. And so that was the council's analysis area for Delta Adapts and for the Social Vulnerability Index. So the City of West Sacramento, you can see in black there. So the legal Delta only covers a portion of the city. So in order to apply this index to the City of West Sacramento, I really needed to replicate the methodology and replicate the index for the City of West Sacramento specifically. So I'll explain my process for that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in order to create this index, council staff selected 14 underlying indicators that were really selected from a comprehensive review of the literature and from existing vulnerability indicators and indices. So looking at factors that increase vulnerability to flooding, extreme heat, and wildfire smoke. And so the 14 selected indicators are really indicators that have consistently been used in other vulnerability frameworks. So 9 of the 14 indicators are at the census block group scale. Census block groups are smaller geographic areas than census tracts. So the council decided to use census block groups as the scale in order to capture more fine-grained vulnerability information. So here you can see the indicators at the block group scale. All of these indicators were from the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey. And yeah, some of the indicators include poverty, percent of households without a vehicle, and you can see some others. Next slide, please. And then 5 of the indicators we used were at the census tract scale. And these were at the census tract scale because they just aren't available at the block group scale. So these indicators, as you can see, measure existing health disparities and disparate health outcomes in populations. So yeah, as you can see, including asthma rate, cardiovascular disease, and also the percentage of individuals without health insurance coverage. And these are from a variety of sources, but as you can see, 3 of these indicators are from CalEnviroScreen 3.0 population indicators, and that will become relevant later in my presentation. Next slide, please. And so jumping ahead to some results, first of all, a little note on how we actually calculated the overall index scores. So for each block group in the city and for each indicator, the 70th percentile for each indicator was calculated. And then a block group was given a score of a 1 or a 0, given a score of 1 if it was in the 70th percentile for that indicator. So the overall score was just a simple sum of the individual indicator scores. And for the census tract level indicators, block groups within those census tracts were given a score based on the census tract score. So as you can see, scores range from 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest most socially vulnerable block groups. So really that means that the most vulnerable block groups scored in the 70th percentile for 10 of the 14 total indicators. And then really you can see here how the most socially vulnerable block groups are all clustered in the northern portion of the city. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so really quickly, I just wanted to compare the index results with CalEnviroScreen 3.0 results. That most of you, I'm sure, are aware of CalEnviroScreen. It's a statewide tool commonly used by jurisdictions to identify disadvantaged communities. But CalEnviroScreen was really designed to identify tracts in California that are disproportionately burdened by and vulnerable to pollution. So I compared these results with CalEnviroScreen, and several of the highest scoring block groups on the index are also located in census tracts with very high scores in CalEnviroScreen. So that really highlights areas of the city that are both burdened by and vulnerable to pollution, and also highly vulnerable to climate hazards. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then to wrap it up, some next steps include index results could be used by the city in their climate change vulnerability assessment pursuant to SB 379. And results could also highlight some areas where perhaps targeted outreach could be done as part of the city's climate action plan update process. And then my next steps really include completing my analysis by overlaying climate hazard exposure data on the index results to identify those overall most vulnerable populations. And then finally, this was only one part of my service project, and I'll also be completing my analysis of vulnerability of city assets to flooding and extreme heat. And next slide. So that's all I have today. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll be happy to answer any questions now or later by email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And if anyone has any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can type it, I think, in our chat box. I think a question did come in from Michael McCormick, who asked if you've engaged with the Sacramento Regional Sanitation District as they wanted to have a deeper dive on their West Sacramento facilities.
That is a good question because I have not engaged with them. I don't actually know that much about them myself. So that's a great idea. I think now I'm gonna look into that. I think that's a great idea. So thank you, Michael.
Great, and I think Michael also said he can do an intro for you if you'd like. And then a question from Kif, I guess curious about technical capacity for someone to adapt this index to their own community, and does it require a team of folks with deep knowledge, or can it be adapted more easily by lay people?
That's a great question. I might be biased because I have spent a lot of time on all of this, but I really think that this index would be easily replicable by others who you could consider as lay people. I had some experience with GIS software previous to CivicSpark, but I didn't really have much experience with using data, manipulating data, statistics. So I would actually say, please go look at my CivicSpark case study, which I think will be posted eventually, because that lays out all these steps in a little more detail. And I think just using that as a guide, anyone could really replicate this, and you don't have to be an expert in, GIS or data analysis or anything like that. So.
Great. And then I think Kif also asked if anyone on your team has connected with the Climate Commission, since I think they just released a plan for West Sacramento.
That is another great comment or question, because no, I have not. I was aware of the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, but that's actually, thank you for pointing that out. And now I do want to go check that out. So I haven't actually connected with them yet, but that's another good group to connect with. And Julia's Yolo Resiliency Collaborative is another good group.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, and Kiv pointed out, I do have another year with the Delta Stewardship Council, so I will be continuing this work. Thanks, Kiv.
I guess if there's no other questions, then it will go on to our last fellow, Amber Leavitt, with the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Like Sarah said, my name is Amber Leavitt, and I'm a climate fellow at the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And my CivicSpark project has been developing a guidance document for the San Francisco Bay Plan's climate change policies. So the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, or BCDC, is a state agency that does planning and regulation of habitat and development projects, as well as dredging and some related activities in San Francisco Bay and along the shoreline of the Bay. And the San Francisco Bay Plan is BCDC's primary planning document that contains policies and findings and maps that guide permitting decisions in those areas of our jurisdiction. So in 2011, the San Francisco Bay Plan, or the Bay Plan, was amended to include a new section of policies that specifically concern climate change, or more specifically, sea level rise. However, since 2011, we've learned that these policies are somewhat challenging to interpret and implement. But since it's been about 9 or so years since then, some best practices have been developed over time. So last year in 2019, BCDC's regulatory managers requested that BCDC planning staff develop a guidance document regarding the climate change policies. So that's what my CivicSpark project has been, and the goals of that project are to develop this guidance document that will help permit applicants more easily understand the permitting requirements regarding climate change and flooding, to help BCDC's permit analysts in streamlining their project analyses regarding sea level rise and flooding. In particular, this should help with the onboarding and training of new permit staff, since this is really kind of institutional knowledge that we're putting down on paper in this guidance document. And it should also be helpful to local governments, local government planning departments who are working on planning shorelines that are resilient and adaptable to sea level rise, by integrating related measures into their general plans, zoning codes, and/or discretionary approval processes. So the content of the guidance, it's broken up into 4 main sections: an introduction that just has kind of an overview of BCDC and our authority and jurisdiction, some just general permitting information and background on the climate change policies. Then the second section is really kind of the main content. It's the guidance on the climate change policies and permitting. The third section contains summaries of the best available science on climate change, sea level rise, and technical information regarding flooding that could impact a project. And then the last section is just an appendix that includes a list of frequently asked questions regarding the policies, a list of example permit conditions from past projects, and we plan on attaching an example risk assessment and adaptive management plan, which I'll explain in just a second. And really throughout the guidance, we provide a narrative for how the policies are interpreted and applied. We explain key terms and phrases from the policies. We describe tools and resources used by permit analysts, such as BCDC's Adapting to Rising Tides Bay Shoreline Flood Explorer, which is shown here. It shows, I think it's 48 inches of total water level in the future, so you can see future inundation around the shoreline. And then we include examples from past permitted projects, and we really kind of break down the projections of sea level rise and other relevant science. Next slide, please. And now I'll provide a little bit more specific information on the policies. So like I mentioned, the San Francisco Bay Plan is BCDC's primary planning document that contains sections of policies that are used in permitting decisions by the Commission. And the section titled Climate Change has 8 policies that are, I kind of paraphrase them here. And the 2 main policies that are used most frequently and are kind of the most important out of the climate change policies are policies 2 and 3. Policy 2 requires projects that are considered larger shoreline projects to develop a risk assessment regarding sea level rise and flooding, and the policy specifically stipulates specific specific components that should be included in the risk assessment. And then policy 3 requires projects that completed a risk assessment in which the risk assessment showed that there are flood risks that threaten public safety to demonstrate how their project will be resilient to mid-century projections of sea level rise. And if the life of the project is beyond mid-century, to develop an adaptive management plan to the end of the project's life or the end of the century, whichever comes sooner. So those are the 2 policies that we really kind of focus on throughout the guidance document. And I'll kind of quickly explain some of the images that I have here. So on the bottom left, I have an inundation map that was submitted as part of a risk assessment to for a project that was permitted by the Commission a few years ago. Right next to that, I just have the table of the sea level rise projections that are in the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance that's developed by the Ocean Protection Council and was most recently updated in 2018. So those are the projections of sea level rise that BCDC uses in its programs and policies. And throughout the guidance, we kind of explain how to interpret that table and how to select an appropriate projection of sea level rise to use when designing a project that will need a BCDC permit. And next to that, I have just the front cover of an example risk assessment and adaptive management plan. So I mentioned that we plan on attaching an example to the end of the guidance as an appendix item. And then right above that, I have one of the tools that we discussed throughout the guidance, which is a spreadsheet developed by BCDC staff that is used to, you can input the elevation of the project, specific points of importance in the project design, as well as various flood levels. And you can look at, it helps the analysts to analyze future flood risks by the blue displays depth of flooding in the future. So the darker blue is a greater depth of flooding, and that's at a specific point in the future and specific storm scenario and things like that. So it's just one of the tools used by permit analysts. And yeah, I realized that I don't have a slide on here for kind of the process and the next steps for the project. So I'll just quickly mention that the guidance is currently still in internal review. It's being reviewed by our senior staff right now. And then we'll be moving into a phase of working with more external stakeholders and getting some public review of the guidance. And then we will return to the Commission. I provided a briefing to our Commission last month, but we'll return to our Commission for a vote to adopt the final guidance. And hopefully it will be completed and up on our website and available for public use and viewing and everything sometime this fall. And yeah, that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, or you can contact me at either of those emails provided there. And thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Amber. And if anyone has any questions, feel free, again, to unmute yourself if you want to ask it directly, or you can type it into the chat box as well.
Hey Amber, this is Miles. I have one. What was the work you were doing on this specific project tied into Arc Bay area? Did you get to work with those folks in any capacity?
Sure. Yeah, I am technically support staff for the local planning working group for the Bay Adapt process, which is still, I guess it's close to halfway through that process. If people don't know what that is, that's a regional, a collaborative effort to develop a regional shoreline adaptation strategy in the Bay Area. And it's kind of being led and facilitated by BCDC staff. But yeah, my supervisor just said in the chat that this project isn't directly related to Bay Adapt. And yeah, those are distinct projects, but yeah, that's a great project to look into if people are interested about that. There's a website for Bay Adapt, I think. I don't remember the name of the website off the top of my head, but if people would like that link, I can share it with them later. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat box.
Oh, sorry. I just realized that, Miles, were you asking about Art Bay Area specifically, not the Bay Adapt process?
Well, I mean, you answered the question. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just quickly say that the BCDC's Adapting to Rising Tides program is completely separate from BCDC's regulatory program. The Adapting to Rising Tides program is a voluntary program that where BCDC staff provide resources and conduct vulnerability assessments and things like that to support local governments in planning adaptation, whereas the Bay Plan and the climate change policies are policies used in BCDC's regulatory program to permit projects. So we do provide in the guidance a section that kind of compares those two programs and how they relate to each other, and how a project that's seeking a BCDC permit can integrate within a larger art project, or kind of vice versa. And yeah, so that's all information that we kind of go into pretty extensively within the guidance.
Great. And I don't think we have a question. We do have a comment, I think, from Linda Deschambault. I hope I'm not ruining your name. I'm wanting to, I think, link some of your projects as best practices on their website. I think, Linda, if you maybe want to connect with me and Kaylee afterwards, maybe we can see how we can do that. But I think that would be great and sounds like a wonderful idea. So I think now that we're kind of at the end, I just also wanted to open up if anyone has any other questions, I think, for our fellows that presented earlier. If there are any questions that came up, I think, while you're kind of mulling on projects or thinking about other connections, and give just a short time if anyone does have any questions. Oh, and I think, yeah, as Annie mentioned in the chat, I think a lot of the CivicSpark case studies will eventually be put up on OPR's Adaptation Clearinghouse. So you'll be able to kind of browse through that, and a different tool that I'll be talking a little bit about, I think, later. But seeing as there's no other questions, I think we'll go on to our, I think, closeout for this session. So I think just want to give a huge congratulations to all our fellows that presented today. I think you all did an amazing job. And thank you to our audience for your participation, support, and encouragement. And this does conclude today's poster symposium session, but we do hope you continue to support our fellows by reaching out to them afterwards, either on LinkedIn or by their email, which Kaylee has sent out in the chat box. And if you'd like to attend, I think, additional poster sessions, please feel free to visit our website, where we have the full schedule of our different activities on there, including our graduation celebration on July 30th. But the next poster session, which we have tomorrow at the same time, is on waste and energy management. And again, a recording of all these sessions will be available on our website, and within a follow-up email that will be sent to you all. An additional reminder, we will be having a new interactive tool where you can view these capstone posters and project placements where they're placed, and you can hopefully gain a better breadth and depth of these various projects that fellows have worked on across California once we have that ready. And again, I think thank you everyone for attending today's symposium, and I hope, I think you all just have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you again soon in our next session. Thank you, everyone.